Hi everyone, welcome to a new video. My name is Rita, and if you're new to my channel, I do book and movie reviews in the hopes of introducing you to your next favorite. And for this video, I'm doing something quite special. This is going to be the third video out of a series focusing particularly on Jane Austen in order to commemorate her life and works. And I will also be fundraising for two institutions that do incredibly important work in the name of Jane Austen. The first is the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation that funds incredibly important literacy projects across the world. And the second is the Jane Austen House Museum, the house where Jane Austen herself lived. And this place will finally be able to open its doors again, but it's very important that we can continue to support it at a time that is definitely going to be very challenging for it. And without any further ado, for this video, I will be reviewing a wonderful book that has been sent to me by Pavilion Books, Jane Austen Embroidery by Jennie, Batchelor and Alison Larkin. And this will be particularly interested for those of you that are skillful with your needles and are able to create beautiful objects and would like to do some that are inspired by Jane Austen and the patterns in her time. And if you are one of those people, I am incredibly jealous of you. I have wanted to do embroidery for an incredibly long time and always prevented myself from doing it out of fear that I would be terrible at it. But honestly, this book features so many beautiful designs that I am feeling now that the time may have come for me to face my fears and to actually just try. And one thing I love about this book is that it has different levels of difficulty. And so if you're not particularly confident with your skills, you can pick one of the easiest ones. And if you're a very seasoned embroiderer by now, then you can go for the more advanced ones. But either way, there are beautiful designs for you at whatever stage you are in your embroidery journey. And one of the things I absolutely loved about this book was the wonderful context that it provided to Austen's life and to Austen's period, focusing particularly on material culture, and also the patriarchal discourses in this period surrounding embroidery, many of which still continue on in our time. And so if you have read about Jane Austen, that you know that her nephew wrote a biography of her, which we should very much take with a pinch of salt, even though it's an incredible resource in order to know what her family's impressions of her were at a time when she was still alive. It's also important to keep in mind that the family was nervous about the Victorian sensibilities in this period, and also sensitive about what people would think of a woman who decided to stay single and profit from her literary works. And so the image they created of Austen was someone that really we wouldn't recognize from her letters at all. Someone who was not concerned at all about being a professional writer, who could not care less about making money. And if you've read Austen's novels and read her letters, you understand that money was something of which importance she understood very, very well. And so we need to take this with a pinch of salt, particularly when they talk about her domestic abilities. So one of the things that her nephew says was that she was really only concerned about looking after her family and looking after their welfare. And this is also how embroidery has been given a kind of patriarchal undertone to it. So in this period, women were expected to produce pieces of work that contributed to the welfare of their family, whether it was beautifying the home but for the benefit of others, or making shirts for the male members of the family, for example. It was never about taking pleasure from it. And there was also an added criticism, which was the idea that women would have spent too much time being preoccupied with this kind of work, and that this would have distracted them from more important concerns. But one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that this was very much a dichotomy between a professional life and intellectual pursuits and embroidery that was created by patriarchy, and which to this day I feel like we still hang on to a certain extent, when it's a completely artificial one. And as Batchelor and Larkin beautifully demonstrate, Jane Austen was the perfect example of why this dichotomy doesn't really make much sense, because Jane Austen was someone who was incredibly passionate about pursuing a career. She was incredibly eager to make money, as much money as possible from her novels, and yet she didn't find embroidery to be something that stood in the way of that in any way. And one of the beautiful moments from Austen's novels is told to us by one of her nieces that features in this book, is that in which Austen is embroidering on one side of the room, and all of a sudden she lets out this scream and she goes running into the other end, and she just quickly writes something down, still giggling, clearly very amused at whatever she just came up with, and then sits back down again. And so embroidery for Austen was very much something that allowed her to continue her writing work, and she definitely didn't see it as something that stood in her way. And we should also not see it as something that she did for the sake of other people. She obviously was very good at embroidery and very much took pleasure from it as well. And so one of the wonderful things about this book is that it doesn't just have those designs for embroidery projects, beautiful as they are, but it also provides you very essential context into the period and into the particular design and the ways in which they featured in Austen's novels. So for example, we have here one of my favorites, which is a housewife. So this is where you would store equipment to do with embroidery. And I also love it because it's so versatile. I feel like you could just use this as, a place to keep your notebook and your pens, and as some kind of pencil case, but it's absolutely gorgeous. So this is one of the more advanced ones. So for more seasoned embroiderers out there. But what I love about this as well is that we get some context into the ways in which this particular object features in Austen's novels. And with the housewife, it particularly focuses on Miss Bates in Emma, which is such an amazing novel, and Miss Bates is such a lovely character. And so there are incredible projects here and very diverse as well. And another thing I thought was absolutely genius about this book was the ways in which it took 18th century designs from the ladies' magazine and adapted it into our period, so into something that we would find useful now. And one of my favorites as well is this mobile phone pouch. And another thing that makes me incredibly jealous of anyone who is very apt in the use of the needle is the ways in which you can create such beautiful objects for yourself with which you can decorate your house. And Jane Austen definitely understood this, since they feature in so many important ways in Austen's novels. One example is Sense and Sensibility, where we see the Dashwood women coming into Barton Cottage after they've had to leave their much larger estate. And at first they are not quite certain about the house. They're comparing it to the place that they've left behind, and they feel this sense of dispossession. And one of the things that helps them is to decorate the house. And Austen tells us that the moment they start decorating the house with their objects, everything changes. And one particular kind of object that really helps in this is objects that they created themselves. So it describes, for example, fire screens that Eleanor has created for herself and with which she decorates the house. And it also describes how she creates fire screens for other people and gives it to them as a present, such as for her sister Fanny, that, as we well know, has done absolutely nothing to deserve it. But this is also a way for a woman without a lot of money to be able to produce this present that is clearly meaningful. And speaking of which, I will take you to my absolute favorite item in this book. I'm not quite sure why it's my favorite, since it's not the most impressive of all of them. We have some objects here that look incredibly beautiful and incredibly detailed, but I think this one would make such a beautiful present for someone in your life. And it's called a Christmas tea box top. It must be just because I love tea, and the idea of having a tea box that looks like this sounds absolutely amazing. But look at that one. I will challenge anyone to find me a more beautiful tea box than this. It's just beautiful, and it looks like something Jane Austen would have had in her house. It has been absolutely wonderful reading this book, getting to know more about the ladies' magazine in this period, and more about the embroidery work that women produce in this period and the various discourses related to it, but also to be introduced to these beautiful designs. So this is definitely a book that I will be recommending to any of my friends that are interested in embroidery, and to any friends considering taking it on. And I would definitely recommend it to anyone interested in Austen as well, as you will find much to admire in it.